June 20th, 1942. A black Steyr 220 sedan idles at the main gate of Auschwitz, the most barbaric killing factory in history. The commandant's personal car is running at the guard post. The wooden barrier is lowering. An SS man steps toward the driver's side window. He carefully grips a pistol in his hand. This is what he doesn't see. The officer in the passenger seat weighs 40 kilos less than a healthy man. His uniform hangs loose on a sharp, skeletal frame after 2 years of starvation. And hidden on the back seat is a secret document, so explosive it could cost Germany the war. In the next 10 seconds, that starving prisoner will do something so audacious, the guard won't just open the gate. He will salute him. 4 men are about to drive out the front entrance of the deadliest place on earth, heads high, inside the commandant's own car, wearing his uniform, carrying his weapon. And the craziest part? It all began just 19 days earlier with plans that seemed impossible. How could 4 prisoners fool the entire SS and ride the camp commandant's car to freedom? And what price did Auschwitz make them pay for that escape? At Auschwitz, the death camp, it wasn't only hunger. It wasn't only cold. It was a system designed to break people day by day, break the body, break trust, break even the idea that you are still human. Kazimierz Piechowski was a Polish political prisoner. After Germany invaded Poland, Piechowski was a Boy Scout, part of a group the Nazis considered dangerous. On November 12, 1939, he tried to cross into Hungary and then continue on to France to join the Polish army. But a German patrol caught him at the border. He was imprisoned in multiple jails before being sent to Auschwitz on June 20th, 1940, as a political prisoner. The moment the transport reached the gate, they were stripped of their names, stripped of their past, stripped even of the right to say I. He told himself, I'm not Kazimierz anymore. I am 918. The number was called out like an inventory item. Hunger here wasn't just in the stomach. It crawled into the mind. Today you were hungrier than yesterday. Tomorrow would be worse. Slowly the brain narrowed to one question. What can I eat to survive 1 more hour? Prisoners measured every spoonful, stared at the ladle, stared at their bowl like it was a part of their body. That thin metal bowl was for everything. Eating, washing, even using the toilet at night. Losing it was a disaster. There was no replacement. And prolonged hunger changed people. They distrusted one another, feared being shorted even a little. Some caught cats, caught rats, ate them raw just to keep going. Auschwitz killed people slowly. The camp had many work details. The worst were outside, hauling, digging, dragging through rain, snow, mud, and cold. There was no real rest. Bodies wore down. Strength fell away piece by piece. People didn't die in one instant. They weakened until they couldn't stand. Their vision dimmed. Their legs no longer felt like their own. When someone dropped from exhaustion, they were still forced to continue. Some worked until they died, dying in the very posture of labor, like a tool that snapped. Corpses were hauled away in wheelbarrows, from the work site to the collection point. In the transition seasons of autumn and spring, so many died that death became routine. There were places where simply stepping close made you choke. The death wall. Prisoners were herded out to line up, a bullet to the back of the neck, bodies tossed into a corner. The pile grew higher, like another wall built out of human flesh. Piechowski once belonged to the Leichenkommando. His job was to deliver bodies to the crematorium. Just remembering it could make your skin go cold, as if ash were still trapped under your fingernails. When a camp turns people into numbers, what is left that could make a number dare to walk out the main gate like someone with authority? Auschwitz wasn't short on people who wanted to escape. It was short on people who dared to escape the right way. From a work detail, the SS would take 10 from a work detail. The SS would take 10 others to their deaths. A simple equation. That's why every impulsive idea was strangled the moment it appeared. 2 years in Auschwitz taught Piechowski a habit: observe. not to understand, to survive. He watched the guards' routes, mealtimes, when the stores were thinly staffed, who had the power to open doors. And he learned this. Opportunity rarely arrives like a miracle. It comes as a tiny crack, visible only to someone alert enough to notice. The turning point came when Piechowski was moved to an under-roof job in the storage area. Indoors meant less cold, less rain, less dying from exhaustion. But the real value was something else: perspective. In the warehouses and SS auxiliary areas, Piechowski saw the internal structure, the control routines, doors left half-locked, bored guards, moments when hands got loose. There he met Eugeniusz Bendera, a mechanic from Chortkov. Bendera worked in the garage and motor pool. He was so skilled that the SS respected him in their way. If a vehicle broke, he fixed it. And sometimes he was even allowed to drive a car around the camp to test the engine. That one detail was dangerous enough, because it sparked a thought Auschwitz didn't want anyone thinking. If you can reach a car, you can turn it into a roadout. But escaping by car in striped prisoner clothes would be obvious. No miracle would hide those stripes at a gate with armed guards. They needed something else. They needed freedom of movement. And in Auschwitz, that didn't begin with paperwork. It began with image, with uniform, with the confidence of the one giving orders. To get away from them, we have to become them, echoed in their minds. So the plan began to assemble by a two-key rule. Key 1, a car. Bendera could handle that, get into the garage, make a key, or at least open the right door at the right moment. Key 2, SS uniforms. Without them, they wouldn't get past the checkpoints. The problem was where to find them. Piechowski had a lead born from humiliation. A work supervisor named Zucker sometimes ordered him up to a private apartment to clean and polish boots. Once, a fellow prisoner asked bluntly whether they could take out Zucker and steal his uniform. A naked question, no morality, no romance, only survival. Piechowski hesitated. It felt like the thought belonged to someone not normal. Auschwitz made people consider killing to live, but not everyone crossed that line easily. Then one day, Zucker sent Piechowski upstairs to fetch empty cardboard boxes. There was a door marked in chalk, an in-camp kind of note, meant to be understood by those inside. Piechowski understood at once. Clothes here didn't mean prisoner rags. It meant SS uniforms. He dared to try the handle. The door was locked but slightly ajar. He pulled and stepped in. Instinctively, he started acting, as if by reflex, improvising a line like, "Sergeant, you're needed downstairs at the main office." Nobody had called that SS man, but Piechowski needed something plausible to cover why he was entering a forbidden place. The result was a beating, grabbed, kicked, punched, called an idiot. "You're not allowed in here." In Auschwitz, one small mistake could get your skull split. But even as they beat him, Piechowski managed to see the most important thing. The storeroom had everything: uniforms, boots, weapons, ammunition, grenades, chemicals, meaning that if they could enter at the right time, they could equip themselves completely. Not escape like men running, but leave like men with guns. Now they had two big pieces. But there was still another steel door. How to leave without being recorded as prisoners missing from a work detail, triggering retaliation and the killing of 10 others. The answer came from a very technical observation. During one unloading of coal rail cars, they moved coke by wheelbarrow to a bunker. Piechowski noticed a hatch cover, a klappa, held in place by a single bolt. Unscrew it, and it opened. Something small, easy to miss. But in Piechowski's mind, it clicked like a lock turning. If they removed that bolt after work, they could crawl through that passage, reach the weapons and uniform depot without crossing open ground. An invisible entrance, a lifeline buried in coal dust. Then the most decisive idea appeared. Not escape, but walk out in the camp's own official form. In Auschwitz, there were teams that hauled heavy carts, usually at least 4 prisoners. Piechowski stressed, There was no such thing as a two-man team. To look legitimate, they needed four. And choosing people in Auschwitz was the deadliest game of all. Invite the wrong coward. Invite someone who planned to survive by informing, and the plan would collapse instantly. Bendera brought in Józef Lempart, a priest. He agreed immediately, no long persuasion needed. The fourth was Stanisław Gustav Jaster, a lieutenant from Warsaw, and also a Boy Scout. 4 men, 4 fates, 1 unspoken agreement. If they failed, death would come first, or torture would come first. Either was equally awful. They set a chilling rule. If the plan failed inside the camp, they would not create chaos. They would kill themselves to avoid being tortured into talking, triggering revenge and more deaths. Work on Saturdays ended at noon. Only Saturday offered the window. They fixed the date. Saturday, June 20th, 1942, exactly 2 years after Piechowski arrived at Auschwitz. The work details returned to camp. The SS dispersed too. That noon, after the soup ration was handed out, they gathered on the upper level of an unfinished column to review everything one last time. No shouted slogans, no oath. Just Bendera asking each man what he had prepared. Every small detail, every item meant for the escape. They asked for a few minutes of silence. In those minutes, each man said goodbye in his own mind. No one cried. In Auschwitz, tears were a luxury. But in the silence, you could hear the heartbeat of a gamble. They knew the first step was the hardest. Passing under the Arbeit macht frei gate like a normal work detail when their names were not on the roster. If the guard simply bent down to check the book, it would be over right there. Imagine this. You're in striped prisoner clothes, hands on the cart handle, and you know that gate doesn't open to freedom. It opens to death, unless you can turn it into a different kind of door. And that is when they began. They had the 2 keys, the car and the SS uniforms. But if a single guard looked down at the roster, everything would end at the gate. So what were they relying on to wager their lives? Noon on Saturday, June 20th, 1942. 4 prisoners haul a large garbage cart. On it, filth, potato peels, dirty cardboard, scraps. An ordinary scene, a perfect cover. Heads down, steps steady. They looked like every other labor team. But anyone watching closely would see their hands turned white from gripping too hard. And their eyes avoided one another. No one dared show a flicker of nerves. They went straight toward the gate, with Arbeit macht frei above it. The life or death point was the book. Every work detail had names. Their detail was fake. If the guard checked carefully, it was done. Piechowski walked in front. He held himself like someone on assignment. His German wasn't for show, it was a weapon. He reported in, like routine, like a man who wasn't afraid. And they gambled on one thing, the gatekeeper's complacent carelessness. The guard looked, smelled the garbage, didn't want to deal with it. He didn't check deeply. He waved them through. In that moment, they didn't escape. They only passed the first layer of the door. There were many more layers ahead, but it was the first step toward freedom, as Piechowski later put it. Past the checkpoint, they turned onto a small path, abandoned the cart. The 4 men ran to the garage. Here the roles fell exactly as practiced. Bendera handled the vehicle. The others worked on transforming into imposing, ridiculous-looking SS men. The garage sat in an SS auxiliary area. Bendera led them. He knew where people would be, where it would be empty. He knew that at this hour guards were easier to neglect their posts because it was Saturday, because it was lunch. He slipped to the garage door and inserted a key fashioned from an old iron spoon. His wrist turned slightly. No loud click, just the metal mechanism exhaling. The door opened. Inside, it was darker and cooler than the yard. Cars stood in rows, silent bodies like sleeping beasts. But here, every one of them could mean death if they chose wrong. Bendera didn't choose at random. He went straight to the Steyr 220 he had seen, touched, and tested during errands for the SS. An officer's car, power on wheels. He inserted the key, turned it. The engine caught. Not a roar, just a steady, low rumble, as if trying to hide. But in the garage space, it was still enough to make a heart jerk. He guided the car out along the route they had calculated toward a rendezvous near the warehouse. There, the other three would appear in SS uniforms with weapons, as if stepping out of the wall. While Bendera approached the car, the other three returned to the invisible route Piechowski had found earlier. The coal bunker. Nearby were 2 coke railcars. Staszek was assigned to stand watch toward the camp. The other three reached the hatch. One by one, they slipped into the coke pile. The last man pulled the cover back into place. In the dark, filthy, airless compartment, they crawled. Coal dust coated their throats. They climbed stairs to the second floor, where the uniform and weapons depot was. They forced the door. Inside was a whole world of the rulers. Clothes, boots, guns, ammunition, grenades. They put on SS uniforms right there. Piechowski chose the best match, the rank of Untersturmführer. In minutes, 4 striped outfits vanished. 4 SS silhouettes appeared, baggy, gaunt, but enough to fool a hurried glance. They carried the weapons down the ramp and returned to where the car waited. And just then, a moment cut in like a blade. They heard the sound of a German car engine. They hid, hands ready. If they were exposed, they would shoot, not to win, just to carve open a few seconds of escape. But the German car only started and drove off. It didn't stop. 3 thin, oversized SS shadows emerged. Then Bendera went into the depot to change as well. He stepped out looking like a real SS man. They locked the depot door again. They took their places in the car as planned. Piechowski in the front passenger seat, Lempart and Jaster in back, weapons pressed close and kept tidy. Bendera tightened his grip on the wheel, shifted into gear, and the Steyr 220 rolled forward, leaving the garage as if it had always belonged to them. They drove toward Wadowitz. On the road, they encountered real SS. One man was pushing a bicycle, cigarette in hand. Seeing their car, he tossed the cigarette down and raised his arm in a Heil Hitler salute. A little farther on, 2 more did the same. Those salutes were both terrifying and useful. They confirmed the disguise was working. And then the final barrier appeared, the last gate arm at the exit. The barrier was down. Bendera slowed. 25 meters, 20 meters. The barrier still didn't move. The guard stood there and didn't open it. Piechowski admitted that in that moment, something inside him collapsed. From the back seat came a sharp prompt like a slap. "Piechowski, do something." Piechowski snapped upright. He opened the right side door, leaned out so the guard could see the rank on the uniform clearly, and he shouted. No pleading, no explanation. In fluent German, he unleashed coarse SS-style abuse, essentially. "What the hell are you doing? Raise the barrier now, or I'll make you regret it." That aggression, perfectly in character, panicked the guard. Startled, he yanked the barrier up. Bendera immediately shifted and floored it. The car shot through before the man could think again. Only after the barrier did they truly stand outside. In that moment, freedom wasn't warm. It was sharp. Cold, like a breath held for 2 years, suddenly released, and still trembling. Auschwitz was behind them. And for the first time in a long time, what lay ahead was not only death. The Steyr 220 had burst through. But when did real freedom begin? When the gate opened, or when the land outside turned into a manhunt? Crossing the barrier didn't mean it was over. It only meant the hunt began outside the wire. That same day, the camp immediately issued an alarm. They mobilized the Gestapo, criminal police, and border forces in the region. For the SS, this wasn't just an escape. It was a slap in the face of order. 4 prisoners had passed through the front gate wearing SS uniforms, carrying SS weapons, and they had taken an important document that Stanisław Jaster carried with him. Witold Pilecki's report, written so the world would know what Auschwitz really was. If that report reached Warsaw, it would become testimony. If that testimony reached the Armia Krajowa, then London, the shadow of Auschwitz, would no longer be rumor. It would be written fact. But outside, the four men had no time to think about history. They thought only about footsteps. They abandoned the stolen car near Makov Podhalansky, about 60 kilometers from the camp. It was unavoidable. The car was the road out, but also the easiest trace to block. They changed clothes, then split up to increase their chances. In escapes, a large group meant collective death. After that, nothing looked beautiful the way it did at the gate. They had to walk. They were hunted relentlessly. Hunger and exhaustion followed them out of the camp like an animal on their backs. Józef Lempart weakened quickly. He was not abandoned. In the end, he was left at a church refuge, a parish house or monastery. Stanisław Jaster headed toward Warsaw. He carried Pilecki's report, thin sheets of paper, but heavy enough to change destinies. He had to reach the underground and deliver it by hand. If he was captured again, it wouldn't just kill him, it would kill the information, and Auschwitz would keep operating in silence. Piechowski and Bendera initially planned to move toward Ukraine, but they ran into hostility from locals. Anti-Polish sentiment made shelter nearly impossible to find. They were forced to turn back through Bendera's connections. There they obtained forged papers, took false names, and each went in a different direction. Freedom now had no cheering. It was hiding. Sleeping with your ears still tuned for engines, seeing any uniformed silhouette and thinking SS. Passing a stranger and still asking yourself, will they help or sell me out? In Piechowski's memory, the time after leaving the camp wasn't only relief. It was a new kind of vigilance. In Auschwitz, they feared being shot. Outside, they feared being recognized, and sometimes that fear was even more refined, because there was no fence you could see. But even if their flight broke apart, even if they had to abandon the car, abandon supplies, abandon strength itself, they had done what many inside the camp only dared to imagine in silence. They proved it was possible. They left the car near Makov Podhalansky and split up in fear. Who would survive long enough to carry Pilecki's report to Warsaw? And what price would fall on the people who never ran? Nazi Germany did not forgive humiliation. It always demanded repayment. The first price did not fall on the four men immediately. It fell on those who couldn't run. Piechowski's parents were arrested in retaliation for the escape and died at Auschwitz. Jaster's parents were also deported to Auschwitz, and both died there. Lempart's mother was taken to Auschwitz in retaliation and died there as well. This was the camp's way of sending a clear message. You may get out, but your family won't. Inside the camp, one man was dragged into hell by indirect evidence. Kurt Pachala, prisoner number 24, in charge of the vehicle team/warehouse. After an investigation, he was tortured, placed in the standing cell in Block 11, and died of thirst and hunger on January 14th, 1943. People said he was forced to eat his own shoes. If that is true, it isn't an anecdote. It is the conclusion of a system. A human being can be pushed that far just to set an example. After the incident, Berlin sent a special investigative commission to Auschwitz to answer one question. How could 4 prisoners humiliate the SS at the main gate itself? The camp also changed its operations. In accounts retold later, the policy of tattooing prisoner numbers is said to have been introduced in response to this escape. The mark was carved into flesh, but if Auschwitz wanted to turn this story into a warning, it accidentally created the opposite legacy. The 4 men proved the killing machine was not invincible. All it took was observation, the right timing, and enough ruthlessness to play a role even more ruthlessly. They didn't do it to become legends. They did it because one man's name was already on a death list, and because one report had to be carried out. After the war, Piechowski still wasn't left in peace. He studied at Gdansk University of Technology and became an engineer. But then the communist authorities sentenced him to 10 years. He served 7 because he had belonged to the Armia Krajowa. Another kind of prison, another kind of freedom taken away. He lived until December 15th, 2017, reaching the age of 98. Later, he became a figure in the documentary Eugeniusz, 2006. Their story entered books, music, films. But the most important thing was never fame. It was this cold truth. In a place designed so no one could leave alive, some people did leave. And the price Auschwitz demanded for that was never measured in only 4 lives. The lesson isn't courage is enough. Blind courage gets you killed faster. Auschwitz was built to cut off hope and turn people into reflex. Hungry, grab, afraid, bow. In pain, go silent. Inside that machine, the 4 men didn't win by luck alone. They won because they saw things as they were, then used the camp's own habits to bend the camp back on itself. They understood that a small detail could open an entire road. A single bolt on a coke bunker hatch, a warehouse door left slightly ajar, a pattern of negligence at Saturday noon. They also understood that trust was the most dangerous thing. Choose the wrong person and the whole group dies, and others die with them. So they set a brutal rule, so evil could not squeeze out more victims. But the hardest lesson to swallow is that the cost of freedom rarely lands on the person who just escaped. It lands on family, on those left behind, on someone like Pachala, crushed simply for being suspected. Freedom comes with a bill, and sometimes that bill is written in someone else's name. That's why this story isn't meant to glorify a cinematic prison break. It reminds us that even in the most brutal place, some people kept hold of something very small, the will not to be turned into an object.